Welcome, NFL football fans. That time again, time for another edition of NFL Football Talk. I'm your host, Charles E. Smith Jr. This is an Inside Sports production, and here we are. We're all the way down to championship weekend of the NFL season. The top two seeds in both conferences are making it, so we know now the champion will be either the LA Rams, the New Orleans Saints, the New England Patriots, or the Kansas City Chiefs. So before we get into breaking everything down, let me go ahead and introduce my co-host. You know I don't work alone here, so I need the help of the best. This is the man who many of you already follow on Twitter at Chris L. Sports, and if not, you should be. A proud graduate of Rutgers University and my favorite East Coast intellectual. Here he is from somewhere in a very rainy part of beautiful Southern California, none other than Chris Lardieri. Chris, what's happening, man?
Charles, thanks for the great introduction. As always, rainy's an understatement. I think I'll be able to kayak in my yard in another couple hours. It is a torrential downpour, and I know the rest of you in the country who's going to face this in the form of snow in a few days and cold and all that will say, wah, wah, Californians. But, this is really, really coming down. So, kind of good there's no NFL games going on here in LA this week, right?
Yeah, it's true. And the Rams managed to get right between the raindrops when they were putting the beat down on the Cowboys this past Saturday. And, you know, there's nothing like looking out your window and actually seeing your neighbor's garbage can float by your house. You know, there's something about that. I know it ain't snow, but, you know, there's just something about that. It does something to you.
It definitely does, and maybe my kids, when they're older, can tell their kids. Back in my day, garbage cans used to flow down the street readily.
Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead and talk about everything. Before I do, just one other thing. Everyone knows I love NHL hockey, and one of my other buddies I do shows with here, that's Andrew Knoll. You can see him on Twitter at Andrew Knoll NHL on Twitter. By the way, we do, once the playoffs start, sometimes we do an NHL show. I'm making a plea for Andrew to come back on and do the show for 2019. All you guys hit him up on Twitter. Tell him his boy C-Dog wants to resurrect talking hockey for this year for the Stanley Cup playoffs. Okay, let's get right down to it now. It's all about the NFL. Chris, what do you take away from the divisional round last week? Were there really any surprises there? I mean, Philly and New Orleans, that one came down to the wire. We will always feel sorry for Alshon Jeffrey for letting that ball slip through his hands right at the end. Philly, the Foles magic looked like it was in order after blowing that 14-point lead. There they were. They would have had the ball at about the 20-yard line of New Orleans with, a minute and 45 to play. Still had a timeout, but it was not to be.
Yeah, I mean, as they say in gambling terms, it was a chalk. All the favorites won. We've got the top two seeds in each conference facing off Sunday. There are a couple minor surprises to me. First off, the Colts and Chargers really didn't put up much of a fight.
No.
A lot of people thought they'd be the fancy or trendy underdog picks, and they really just didn't even show up to play in either game from the outset. And then secondarily, within the Rams-Cowboys game, Sean McVay, some people think it was gutsy, him going for on 4th and 1. Ultimately, the Rams get the touchdown. But at that point, you kick the field goal, you're up 11. It's still a two-possession game. That really could have blown up in his face. So keep your eye on that. You know, Sean loves his fake punts and his gutsy 4th and 1 calls from his own side of the 50-yard line. So let's see if he keeps that going on Sunday and if it blows up in his face in New Orleans.
Oh, that's true. And speaking of gutsy calls from your own side of the 50, how about Sean Payton there in New Orleans going for it on 4th and 1 from his own 30-yard line with his team down 14-0 in the first half? And ultimately, that winds up being a touchdown where also to get that touchdown, they went for it on 4th and goal.
Gutsy with a capital G in both cases there, and really, they don't get that. That game's over, even
right.
though it's still early in the game, relatively speaking. But if anything, a change in momentum sent the message to his team and the Eagles. You can't be flat-footed against this New Orleans team, and did work out. And then you've got super quarterback. I don't know, what do we call him? Is he a slash like Cordell Stewart, Taysom Hill?
I think
really
so, yes.
Been a great weapon all year and on the sneak there, so watch out for him Sunday, too, if you haven't seen much of the Saints this year.
Yeah, that's true. And one of the intriguing things about the matchup here as the Rams go back to, and actually both of these games, we had games earlier in the season where these teams met. The New Orleans beat the Rams in Week 9. The New England Patriots beat KC in Week 6. So everyone gets a chance for revenge here. But one of the things is with the offenses of the Rams and of New Orleans, the same thing, two-headed monsters on both sides of the ball. For New Orleans, it's Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara. And for the Rams now, it's Todd Gurley and C.J. Anderson. And you've got to think maybe one of the best things that happened to the Rams is Todd Gurley having gotten injured a few weeks ago. If not, they don't pick up C.J. Anderson, and no one knew he had this much left in the tank.
Yeah, and secondarily, Malcolm Brown getting hurt, who the Rams have been high on as Gurley's backup. I mean, really
right.
open the door for Anderson. But the Rams should probably send some sort of a thank you card to John Gruden and his band of grinders up in Oakland, because he had Anderson, and I guess for whatever reason he didn't like him. And when all else fails, your career can get resurrected once you leave Gruden's Raiders, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Cooper.
And I don't know what C.J. Anderson was doing while he was unemployed, but it looks like he hadn't missed any meals. In fact, one of the things was when I look at him and Gurley alternating in and out of the lineup, you really see the difference there. And I would venture to say if both of them were to go out of town to some type of high-class function or something, and maybe they were rooming together, and Todd Gurley forgot his belt and asked C.J. if he could borrow his, how many holes? I think Gurley would have to put probably about, 5 or 6 holes in that belt to be able to cinch it up so it would fit around him?
Yeah, he'd probably need a nice pick to do the job, too. But, getting back to eating, Todd Gurley doesn't do those Carl's Jr. commercials anymore. Maybe C.J. Anderson can be the spokesperson next year.
Yep, there we go. Okay, now, one of the things we were talking about pre-show rather, was the whole thing of everyone likes to make calls and, say things that are maybe a little, when you're doing a prognostication. But this was not a great year to be a genius in the NFL, because here we have the top 2 seeds in both conferences made it to the championship round. And not only that, but they're the 4 highest scoring teams in the NFL. And last year there's somebody sitting out there who called Philly for the Super Bowl in Week 10 or something like that. But this year, who cares if you call the Rams or New Orleans or the Patriots or Kansas City? They were just kind of no-brainer picks. And every now and then, the no-brainer picks wind up being the Final Four.
Yeah, they really do. Although I'll say at the beginning of the season, while there were a number of people high on the Chiefs, there were question marks with Patrick Mahomes coming in as essentially a rookie quarterback, and given the Chiefs' postseason futility under Andy Reid, I guess in relative terms they were the long shot of the group. But yeah, the rest, I think everyone thought, or even midway through the season, that they'd be contenders here. Nothing surprising. And bigger picture, Charles, I think it's great that you and I don't give any Super Bowl predictions in August or September. It's just too darn hard to predict now. I know we have our gambling segment on the show, but to try and pick Super Bowl winners during training camp is fairly, if not next to impossible.
Yeah, there we go. And, we got to give ourselves some props for the gambling segment, which is going to be coming up here after we do the game picks. But, hey, since Week 14, we're on a run of 9-1 with our Gambler's Delight picks. And this is hard business as far as one thing to pick games, but picking against the spread or picking over-unders, that's a whole other skill altogether. And just to give you some idea, in the wild card round, as far as the favorites, only one favorite won. All the other favorites lost, and the only favorite that won, which was Dallas, did not cover the spread. Last week, all the favorites won, but only one did not cover the spread. And that team that did not cover the spread was New Orleans, and they didn't cover the spread against Philly. And by the way, who was the underdog that Mr. Lardieri told you to take last week? None other than the Philadelphia Eagles. By the way, I said to play the under when it was KC and Indy. I got that one too. But you know what? There's an art to it.
Why, thank you. And, full disclosure, Charles, I gave 2 picks as a bonus last week and mentioned the Colts as well, and that went up in flames. So batting 500 isn't too bad, but just had a feeling about the Eagles and Nick Foles. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that team going forward. I'm guessing they're going to go with Carson Wentz, but you say what you will. Foles is a gutsy quarterback. They got up early on the Saints, and if anything, I think it shows the Saints' vulnerabilities a little bit, and it also shows the fact that team can still play defense.
Yeah, that's true. There we go. So, Chris, I always give you a chance here before we go into the picks of the week. Mr. Lardieri, before we go ahead and pick the NFC and AFC championship games, you got some words of wisdom for the crowd out there?
Yeah, absolutely. The first game, we won't have any weather issues with the Saints and the Rams in the Superdome, but second game, you got to love the NFL under Roger Goodell. Years ago, they pushed back the start times of these conference championships to 3 Eastern, 12 Pacific for the first game, and I believe it's 6:40 and 3:40 Pacific time for the later game, and it inevitably ends up where we've got a late cold weather game. Well, this Chiefs-Patriots game is looking like single-digit temperatures at game time, 5:40 Central Time. It might put one of my favorite sporting events I witnessed in person, the '87 NFC Championship game between the Giants and the Redskins at a windy, frigid old Giants stadium. That's going to look tropical compared to this. So once again, everything's about TV. I feel bad for your fans in Kansas City. I hope it's worth your while, but I know I won't be complaining about rain watching that game Sunday evening.
Yeah, that's true. And really there in KC, from what I understand, it's just a matter of whether or not the temperature stays above or below zero, but it's definitely going to be in single digits. And I remember when your New York Giants beat the Packers in Green Bay, I'll never forget Tom Coughlin's frozen face on the sidelines.
Beat red.
Yes. Absolutely. So let's go ahead and we'll pick them in order here. So 12:05 Pacific time, the LA Rams, who are 3.5-point underdogs, are going to be in New Orleans. Over under is 56.5. In week 9, New Orleans beat LA in New Orleans, 45-35. And one of the backstories here, you remember Marcus Peters, the much maligned defensive back who should be an All-Pro for the Rams, but somehow manages to make bonehead plays here and there. Sean Payton was talking a little bit of smack about him after the game, so he said, keep on talking that stuff, Mr. Payton. We'll be back. I'll see you soon, and we'll have ourselves a bowl of gumbo. So he's in New Orleans. He and Sean Payton are going to get to have that bowl of gumbo. But what is going to happen here when these two teams meet, Mr. Lardieri?
I'll go out on a limb and say Sean Payton won't shove him at 50-yard line like Amari Cooper did after his team lost last week, but I digress. Been going back and forth on this one all week. I know it was a great game back on November 4th. They were going back and forth. The Saints took a big lead, and the Rams came roaring back, but they ultimately lost by 10. The difference in this time around is there's no Aqib Talib in November. He's back. The Saints won't be able to pick on Marcus Peters like they were. I'll go on a limb and say Talib covers Michael Thomas, who played phenomenally on Sunday and is one of the, if not the best receiver in the NFL, at least playing right now. And I think, too, with this two-headed monster at running back with Gurley and Anderson, the first time around, Gurley really couldn't get going as much as he would have liked to because they had to resort to passing when they fell behind. He had 13 carries for 68 yards, not bad statistically, but not a lot of touches. But if you rotate that kind of 21st century thunder and lightning between the two change of pace backs, I think that bodes well for the Rams. I think it'll be a close game. Once again, I think defense will be case. Some teams got to make a couple stops, and we saw the Saints do that Sunday. Marcus Lattimore had a phenomenal game. I know Jared Goff's been shaky, but for whatever reason, I felt all along the Saints would win being at home, but every year I know there's going to be one surprise in the conference championship. For selfish reasons, for my son, for my the Rams fans I know, like my friend Martin that I live among. I hope this doesn't screw it up for you, but I'm going to pick the Rams just because I want to see them in the Super Bowl. I think it's a great story, and frankly, I think they got a shot to win. We've seen this year when teams have rematches in the playoffs, the second time around it worked for the Chargers, and heck, I say it works for the Rams. They win a close one. Hopefully it's an epic game.
Yeah. Well, I think this will probably be the more exciting of the two games. I look for a lot of scoring in this game, and I do like what the Rams have done since C.J. Anderson got there. And with players who get a second chance, like C.J. Anderson really getting a chance now, he can taste it. You've got a chance to actually get to the Super Bowl. Also on the defensive side of the ball, Ndamukong Suh, who is probably going to become a free agent after the season, but still, what a great thing to put on your resume that you actually helped get the team to the Super Bowl. No disrespect to Drew Brees and the boys, and I think this is going to be a magnificent shootout of a game. This is one of those games, I think, which will make football fans out of casual watchers. But I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to take the Rams also to get over the hump, get to the Super Bowl, and I think the defense is really going to be the difference in the game. The Rams defense is finally going to step up, get the job done. And, hey, they had 200-yard rushers last week when they played against Dallas. So I like what the Rams are doing. I also love the Saints. I hope nobody from New Orleans feels that I'm dissing their squad, but I got the Rams here.
Charles, it's nice that we agree, but at the same time, I'm not sure if it's a good or a bad thing given your postseason track record.
Yeah, it's true. And you know what? There's no shame in my game. So postseason, we picked the wild card weekend and the divisional round. Chris is sitting at 5-3. I'm sitting at 1-7. The only game I picked right last week was New Orleans over Philadelphia, and I barely got that one right. Thank God bless Alshon Jeffrey, or else I would have been 0-8 in the postseason, much like Phillip Rivers is against Tom Brady all time in the postseason.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm 6-2. How dare you shortchange me?
Oh, you are 6-2. I'm sorry. My statistician, I put them on notice today, so probably I'm gonna have to fire my statistician tomorrow.
Well, you know what? It's hard when you're a government worker and you're not getting paid, so we got to have some sort of compassion for them, right?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so let's go to the late game now. This will be at 3:40 Pacific time, obviously 6:40 on the East Coast. So New England Patriots, they are a 3-point underdog in Kansas City. The over-under is 54.5. Week 6, New England at home beat Kansas City 43-40. Both these teams coming off of big wins last week. So tough game to pick here. I think overall, you look at the talent level, Kansas City has more overall talent than do the Patriots. But then again, you got the game planning of Bill Belichick going for New England versus the somewhat raw skills of Pat Mahomes, who's really getting a taste of this level of football. I don't know if weather will be a factor. I mean, who is that really going to affect more, the Chiefs or the Patriots? Instincts say to go with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady and all the rings and all the experience, and then on the other side, you got Andy Reid, and we know what he does in big games, but I'm going to go ahead and go against my instincts for once this postseason, and I'm going to say KC pulls this out, and the upstart Kansas City Chiefs get to their first Super Bowl since the days of Lynn Dawson. I got Kansas City.
Wow, Hank Stram matriculating the ball with his crowd.
That's it,
Charles?
Yes.
Yeah.
Ed Podolak, Ed Podolak.
Yeah. I do like your George Costanza instinct reversion. So good news. I'm going to agree with you. Well, I do think it was impressive what the Pats did. They had a week to prepare for the Chargers, but we all know the Chargers. Apparently the Patriots are their Achilles heel, and they can't beat that team. But you look back, Andy Reid coached teams, even in Kansas City, have played the Patriots tough, although a lot of those games were in New England. And I think the first time around they really had a shot. There was a play late in that game where Brady ran it in, and the rules were still kind of new, and I forget the defensive player for the Chiefs. He had a shot at him, but he thought he might hit him in the head and got
right.
And he went in untouched for a touchdown. I don't think that happened this time around. I think the Chiefs' defense has improved, and I also think I don't think the Patriots have the defensive talent to stop Patrick Mahomes and all his weapons. On the flip side, I really don't think, other than Julian Edelman, that Tom Brady's got a lot. I mean, Gronk looks like he's running on fumes. Sony Michel did have a nice game, but I think the Chiefs will be able to contain him like they have down the stretch with running backs. And for purely selfish reasons, I just want a rematch of that epic Monday night game in the LA Coliseum. So Chiefs will be my pick.
There we go. And the other thing is, when you got players that are banged up, remember, when you're banged up and you have to go out there and play in the cold, those stiff muscles tend to tighten up a little bit more. So that may be a factor as well. But, you know, one of the things here, I listened to the broadcast last week, and a point that Charles Davis made over the air was that with the New England Patriots and getting to their 8th straight AFC Championship game, is that it's not just they did it, but the way that the NFL is set up now, with the way that you draft, with the way that you play the first place schedules and everything, the NFL sets it up for parity. So the NFL rules are set up so that a New England Patriots team in this era cannot possibly exist, and yet they keep doing it.
It's truly amazing, especially when you consider they're picking at or near the bottom of the draft.
Right.
They do a lot of trades and move around, but it's not a team doing it with free agency and high draft picks. They're not like the Cleveland Browns or even the Eagles or Rams that traded up to get a quarterback. And you figure, too, Belichick's a de facto GM there, so he's got his imprint all over this team. And an old quarterback, too, Brady, who just keeps chugging along. I mean, in other teams like my Giants with Eli, I mean, there's questions about whether they should even bring him back, and no issues with Brady. It's, for all the controversy that surrounded them over the years, I think when the history book is closed on them, it's going to be one of the most impressive runs of professional sports.
Yeah, that's true. And, you know, it kind of makes me think for, you know, one of my other favorite teams, just because I have family ties back there with the Pittsburgh Steelers. When I look at the roster the Steelers have had over the past 10 years, there's really no reason why the Steelers could not have been the Patriots. Looking at the talent they had on the field, there's no reason why they couldn't have, except for the discipline. And we talk about it's always just a couple of 2-3 plays when you watch Patriots games where they played those situational things a little bit better. And even when they lost the Super Bowl last year, I mean, when they got beaten by Philadelphia, let's call it that, give Philadelphia full credit. But Doug Peterson had to coach his behind off to win that game. Just the amount of times he had to go for it on, you know, 4th and short, on 4th and goal and things like that. Everything, he had to pull out all the stops to beat the Patriots last year. It was just amazing. They will not beat themselves, and it just reminds me of what the great boxer Floyd Mayweather said when going into a big fight. It comes down to this. It's like, when we're in the ring, how many mistakes are you going to make? Because I'm not going to make any.
Absolutely, and I completely agree, especially not only just a Philly special play, but just the way they attacked the Patriots defense,
right,
and managed to, late in the game, get the turnover on Brady. Just there's so many things that happened there in that game because the Patriots don't make any errors. That's just a completely smartly coached team. As Belichick's fond of saying, do your job, essentially know what your role is, and everyone from man 1 to man 53 is held to the same standards. So, yeah, I mean, look, while I'm picking the Chiefs, I wouldn't be surprised if the Patriots win this game.
Right.
I know a lot of people will groan, but at the end of the day, I think whatever the matchup ends up being between these 4 teams, whoever the final 2 are, I think we'll get an intriguing matchup out of it. There's a lot of storylines to be had for this Super Bowl. Yeah,
there we go. And I think for looking at it, the Super Bowl being indoors, so weather's not going to be a factor. But no matter how the matchup works, this Super Bowl is going to be a great one, like the last 2 have been. So I'm really looking forward to that. Now, let's go ahead and get on to our Gambler's Delight segment here. As you know, every week we pick a team because everyone likes to put a little bit of juice on a game, as they say. So if you happen to be in New Orleans, I'm sorry, not New Orleans, but Las Vegas, where you can go ahead and walk into a sports book, you got $20 burning a hole in your pocket, want to know where to bet? What Mr. Lardieri does is give you a underdog you should put it on. What I do is I look at the over-under lines. I tell you where you should place the over or the under on a particular game. And by the way, since week 14, of the NFL. We are 9-1 on our picks. The only one was me. I missed when I picked the over with Houston and Indy, and Houston's defense didn't show up, offense did not show up in the wild card round, but we're on a good roll right now. So, Chris, have you got a Gambler's Delight pick for us this week?
Well, I may as well put my play money, let's say, where my mouth is, and go with the Rams. We're getting 3.5 points. While I went back and forth on who to win the game, and by no means would it surprise me if the Saints win, I do think last time 10-point game there was one touchdown that made the difference, but would not be surprised if the field goal decides this. Hard-fought game between two teams that I think are really evenly matched. But like I always say, take that half a point. If it does end up being that way, then the Rams do go down. There's nothing sweeter than covering by half a point. I outlined my logic earlier. I think the Rams will win. You've always got to have this thing called insurance in life. Take the points. The Rams plus 3.5.
Okay. All righty. What I'm going to do is that same game, I'm going to say the over-under is 56.5. I'm saying go ahead and play the over on that game. Last time they got together, they did combine for 80 points. So probably won't be that high, but I think they're going to combine for a lot. I was leaning toward taking the under on the New England KC game because I think New England's going to try to control the ball on the ground. That's going to limit the amount of possessions. So I'm looking at probably the under on that one, but when the rubber meets the road here, I got to pick just one. I'm going to say the Rams not the Rams, but the Rams New Orleans play the over 56.5 versus the under 54.5 on New England KC. So Rams New Orleans play the over.
I hope we're right and the streak continues.
Okay, there we go. Okay, everybody, remember, we'll be here every week we'll be here to pick the Super Bowl. Then after that, we'll talk about what happened in the Super Bowl. And then on the off season, we'll do a show every now and then just to keep everybody in the loop. And you can follow me on Twitter at The Inside Sports. You can follow Chris on Twitter at Chris L Sports. And before we sign off, Mr. Lardieri, you have some final words for us.
Yeah, I heard something in passing today where there's some buzz that potentially not this year, but with the 2020 NFL draft, the league might institute as the NBA does with their ping pong balls or whatever it is, a lottery so that we don't have any questions with teams tanking or anything like that, like the NBA is so fond of doing. Don't know if it's got any legs, but really interesting to me. Considering the way the NFL is with change, I just initially think that they'd have a hard time instituting this, but I don't think it's entirely a bad idea. I think what happens in the NBA, even with a lottery, the amount of tanking that goes on is disgraceful. And you look at a team like the Raiders this year, who essentially had quit on John Gruden at various points during the year. Well, what's to say, or even like the Browns last year, players just don't give up, or a coach knows they're a lame duck. They just figure out give up. We'll go 0-16 if there's a franchise quarterback out there, the next Peyton Manning or Andrew Luck, whatever the case is. So something to follow. I think it's an interesting proposal. Don't know what the logistics will be, but keep your eyes on it going forward.
Yeah, there we go. And that comes on the heels of news that came out of Miami, that my Miami Dolphins, from what I understand, are considering quote-unquote tanking this next season so they can have the number one overall pick and get that quarterback from Bama who has the polysyllabic last name. So who knows if that triggered it or not, but we shall see what happens.
I know his name is Tua. That's about it. Can't pronounce the rest.
Tagovailoa. That's it. And trust me, I had to stare at the cover of a Sports Illustrated for about 45 seconds pronouncing each syllable of that name before I learned how to say it. It took some time.
Well, you won't be saying Jalen Hurts because he just transferred to Oklahoma, but I digress.
Yeah, that's true. But then there's the Kyler Murray situation, which we'll talk about next week, whether or not that little guy should come out and try to be a quarterback or go baseball. Some interesting opinions. We'll go ahead and kick that around next week. But that's it for this week's show. Thanks, everybody, for listening, whether you're listening on Podbean or if you find us on iTunes. Tell all your friends. We definitely love doing the show for you. So for Mr. Chris Lardieri, I'm Charles E. Smith, Jr. We're signing off. This has been NFL Football Talk. Enjoy the Championship Sunday, and we'll be back next week to preview the Super Bowl.